Can you briefly give us an overview of what an ERP is and what its uses are?
Let me try to be very succinct on that. And thanks for kind of bringing me back, because there might be some folks that aren't familiar. If you are more of an OT technology person, this is in the IT realm. Okay, let's start to get oriented there. So ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, I'll call it a class of software. Been around for a really long time, like really long time, 4 decades maybe. Probably the oldest vendor started in the 70s. If you don't count IBM, they had the product in the 60s. It's been around a long time. If you're an absolute purist, you might say it's HR, finance, and supply chain, because that's the core functionalities. But it is the critical backbone for business operations in a business. Certainly HR, finance, supply chain, but inventory, production, logistics, finance, sales, HR, those are the broad functions. And it has certainly evolved over time. To just mentally think back in there, whatever, depending on how old you are, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, think of all the stuff that didn't exist. Mobile phones, cheap memory, processing power, etc. As ERP has evolved, it's taken advantage of those things. So that's in a nutshell what it is. I could maybe advance a little bit more unless you had any other follow-up question.
What would trigger an end user to consider a new ERP system? Because that's quite an undertaking, and we'll probably talk about some of those challenges. But when would an end user, what kind of maybe challenges or pain points would they experience when they consider a new or a different ERP than what they've had?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to think about that, right? One of the trends that's happening right now is there's a lot of customers that are making an investment because there is a move from an on-prem installation to cloud. So that I would call an external catalyst to nudge somebody to make a decision. That's one category. Another reason somebody would make a move, it's a small-ish company that's growing rapidly and they need something to enable them to grow into. That might is frequently another catalyst or change to make the investment. There could be capabilities, it could be an architecture, it could be a desire to leverage data, it could be multi-geography, multi-currency, multi-language. So that's another category. And then another kind of broad one would be, I've been on this thing for a decade, built up a bunch of technical debt, did a bunch of customization, I'm losing staff, it's hard for me to maintain this thing. I need to bite the bullet and do something to upgrade. So in my mind, most of the conversations we have fall into one of those. And then you never want to do this technology for technology's sake, right? So even if somebody approaches us and says, hey, I want to go from X to Y or version X to X plus 1, that's great. But if you look at why these things go off the rails, it's because it's mostly a technical implementation. So there has to be business benefit there. So the reason I like this space, to tie it back to the engineering discussion we had, is there's a technical element to it, of course, right? Planning, the deployment of the technology, the integration, the use of the data, the ongoing maintenance of that, certainly. But for somebody that is a technical background, there is certainly a business element to this. And that's quite frankly what was attractive to me about this, because the investment has to be against the backdrop of a business case. And that could be cost reduction. It could be labor efficiency. It could be a stool or a leg in the stool of digital transformation. But there needs to be a business justification in order to make the investment, because your point is well taken. It is expensive. It can be very time consuming. And there's a lot of ways it can go off the rails if you're not careful about it, right? The catalyst could be on-prem to cloud. It could be I've got an old system. It could be I need to improve my business performance. Those are the big buckets of why somebody would choose to part with their dollars.